Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me today, I have a Jer.
Hello.
And a Wheeler.
Guten Morgen.
Reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you. You're supported Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome to part 3 of our Midnight Hunt set review. Today we're going to be covering gold, lands, and artifacts. Reminder that our set reviews are not exhaustive. We will not be talking about every single card in the set, only the ones that we think are relevant to the format or worth talking about. I mean, sometimes we'll talk about cards because folks are convinced they're good, and we'll try and talk you out of it. Gently though. There are no wrong answers. Also, we will be including any of the Commander Precon cards that we think are going to make a splash in the format too. Let's jump right into it and start off with Angel Fire Ignition. This is a 3-mana sorcery for 1, a red, and a white, and says, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste. That's 5 keywords until end of turn, and then you can flash it back for 2, a red and a white. Wheeler, what do you think?
This card has me so excited for something that is just purely like smash my head against whatever is in my way, you know? Like I look at this card and I mean, frankly, this card made me like it was the fuel, the ignition, if you will, to get me to throw Jeskai midrange back together. I think I kind of mentioned it on the episode 1 of this set review, but I saw this card and was like, okay, what happens if I target a Geist the Saint Traff or like a True Name Nemesis or
Lightning Angel?
Anything. A 0/1 goat token.
Yeah, like the card, I was trying to think of like reasonable cards that I have played in Jeskai midrange, especially the more aggressive versions that have some amount of protection. But even then, like I'm willing to stretch protection to Restoration Angel has 4 toughness, Brimaz has 4 toughness, you know, that kind of thing. Because if you have a target for this card, you are going to get to have, I mean, to hell with War Leader's Helix. Look at the life swing that this can cause. And you already just have what you're doing next turn figured out, right?
Yeah, this again.
You're just like, great, I have my next 2 weekends planned. I'm going to Angel Fire Ignition and then Flashback Angel Fire Ignition, because both of these are doing what you want, you know, killing your opponent.
So I have a question, and I don't know if this is the parallel we want to look at, but how does this compare to equipment? When you're looking at, you know, bang for your buck or payoff as something you add to your creatures.
Serge, I'm treating this more like a Berserk.
Yeah.
Where if I'm not immediately winning, like it's like a Berserk where I'm winning the game, but they don't immediately know it. You know, when you cast Berserk, usually that's game over. But with this one, I'll cast it and technically it won't be game over, but in a lot of matchups, it kind of just will be.
Do you know what other deck I want to play this in? Naya.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Verter's Gear Hulk something and then cast this.
Woo!
And you also just love to see more cards that just absolutely are going to make mono red players like read triple take. Be like, what?
Why does it have so many words?
Because finally somebody felt guilty about Boros at WotC. They're like, look, Boros is not being great. We need to make that change. And in the meanwhile, it's like Boros has been fine, but okay, yeah, sure, why not? We'll take this. Great.
All right, let's move on. Next up, we have Arcane Infusion. This is a 2-mana instant for a blue and a red, and reads, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and then you can flash it back for 5. 3, a blue and a red.
This card's a little tempting in certain decks, provided you have an incredibly high density of instants and sorceries, but I'm a little trepidatious with it just because the obvious comparison is Pure Through Depths. It looks at 5 but doesn't have flashback and is less color constrained.
Or like Bad Impulse or something.
Yeah, the problem is Impulse, you're always getting your card back even if all the cards are bad, and that's good. Like getting 4 bad cards off the top of your deck is good because you can't miss with Impulse, whereas like there's a chance that you put good cards on the bottom of your deck, don't get to take anything, and just be down a card. The fact that it does flash back eventually does mean it's less likely to like fully whiff. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'd try it out in High Tide, like exactly blue-red High Tide. And I can't think of another deck that would be willing to play this card. Like these types of cards are traditionally not good in Highlander because you're not able to have the density of like good cards. Like we can only play one Ponder, one Brainstorm. So you can't just like jam your deck full and make it half instants and sorceries as well as 4 formats can. You're sort of incentivized to play other cards like Sensei's Divining Top and stuff like that fill a similar role but are just better than the 10th best instant and sorcery.
We're going to do a pass on that one, I guess. Next up, Arlen, the Pack's Hope. This is a 4-mana Arlen Planeswalker with 4 loyalty for 2, a red and a green, +1 ability. Until your next turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. -3, create 2/2/2 Green Wolf creature tokens. And then it has Daybound, which means there's a backside. So if Arlen transforms, becomes the Moon's Fury. Also has 4 loyalty, but presumably when it flips, its loyalty is tracked. So that's if you cast it and it's nighttime, it'll enter on this side with 4 loyalty. +2, add a red and a green. 0 until end of turn, Arlen the Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. JR, what do you think?
This card's kind of hard to evaluate, I think. The -3 is the effect is powerful, but putting it down to 1 loyalty immediately is not super exciting. It does likely get you ahead-ish on board. The +1 is kind of It's all right against blue decks, but even there, it's you kind of once you get a stick of Planeswalker against a blue deck, you don't really want to just keep passing the turn. You want to apply more pressure and force them to deal with it. And the backside, I'm actually pretty underwhelmed with. The +2s, like by the time you're at 4 mana, most decks don't need two extra mana a turn. And a 5/5 with trample, indestructible, and haste is pretty large, but I think this card's actually going to struggle from protecting itself. Like you can make 2/2/2s, but then like nothing else for several turns. I just don't see the play pattern where this card sort of fits into any deck in our format.
Next up, we have Dennick, Pious Apprentice. This is a 2-mana 2/3 legendary human soldier for a white and a blue mana. Has lifelink and the text, cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. And then it also has Disturb. So you may cast this card from your graveyard transformed for its Disturb cost, which is 2, a white and a blue, or 4 in total. And then you get Dennick, the Pious Apparition. This is a legendary spirit soldier 3/2 with flying, and says whenever one or more creature cards are put into a graveyard from anywhere, investigate. But this ability triggers only once each turn, and it has the Disturb text. If Dennis would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. And I'll throw to me for this because I haven't weighed in on too many cards. I like this in my blue-white tempo deck that I've just kind of been playing around with for quite a bit of time. I like that it has that sort of double duty as a hate bear with the hating cards in graveyards with lifelink, and I love that it comes back. One of the big things, at least in the blue-white style of tempo deck, is card advantage and being able to stick one threat and just sort of ride that for long and interact with your opponent sort of on the stack, but not so much on the board. And I love both sides of this card for that ability. It is a little awkward that cards in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities. It will affect, I think, exactly your Snapcaster, but it's not unlike a tempo deck to have a non-bow in it or any sort of hate bear deck. I mean, every Death and Taxes player has had to deal with their Thalia making their equipment in their hand look kind of awkward. So I don't see it as being too much of an issue if provided, you're against a red deck or you're just applying pressure, or, if it has a sword, I think you're okay to wait a turn. Any agreement or disagreement on that one?
Yeah, I think this card is pretty good. You should be a little careful and not necessarily count it as like graveyard hate because it doesn't do anything to some graveyard decks. Like Dredge can often still operate pretty fully under this card. Storm.
Yeah, this is the classic, like somebody comes up to me and they're like, Storm's so good. I mean, I had a hand with Dennick and Duress and I couldn't even beat them. And it's like, yeah, one of those cards didn't do anything.
Yeah, that's I think this card is pretty good on the whole. I'd just caution, like as Ben said, counting it as
Right. Yeah, it's not going to shut things down. Yeah.
yeah, it's good against Reanimator, not so good against some other things.
Hmm. Next up, we have Diregraph Rebirth. This is a 5-mana sorcery for 3 black-green and reads, this spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each creature that died this turn. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you could flash it back for 5 black-green. Jer, what do you think?
I think this card is actually pretty good in aristocrats decks that are playing both black and green. I think it's pretty easy to reduce the cost enough to make it easy to cast, and you'll often have games where someone will be able to remove your key creature, whether it's an engine card or a blood artist or something like that, and being able to get it back for fairly inexpensively is nice. And the ability to recur it again in a big turn, say you're sacking a bunch of stuff and you can bring back like a Zathrid Necromancer or something like that and double up on your creatures twice. That's pretty nice. So I could see it being effective in that deck.
What about something like The Rock or a Recurring Nightmare deck? Do you think it does enough there or too expensive?
I think it's too expensive on the whole. Like you have access to stuff like Recurring Nightmare and just more powerful cards, and I don't think you're gonna be able to cost reduce this often enough for it to be worthy of an inclusion in a more mid-rangey style deck.
That makes sense. Next up, we have Faithful Mending. This is a 2-mana instant for a white and a blue. Gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards. Flashback for 3, 1 a white and a blue. Jer again.
This card is quite good. The obvious comparison is Faithless Looting. It costs 1 more on the front side, but it's an instant, so I think we'll forgive it. And it also gains you some life, so by the time you've cast it twice, it maybe buys you an extra turn to make the extra mana worthwhile. I think it's probably especially strong in a Reanimator deck that will play both blue and white. Probably plays white less often, but we'll often splash it for Unburial Rights or something anyway, so it's not too big of a stretch to include this, especially with if you're playing lots of looting effects anyways. You can bin this off one of your other looting effects and then flash it back later. So yeah, I think it's especially strong in Reanimator, and I think it's pretty reasonable to play in basically any deck if you can utilize your graveyard well enough.
Yeah, I feel like this card might end up being much like Faithless Looting, one of those cards where people are, going to be a little slower on the uptick, and then eventually will just be like, oh, I can cast this card. I should probably play this card.
Yeah. I don't compare things to Faithless Looting like lightly.
Yeah.
I think that card's busted, and I think this card is like pretty close.
Can we just talk about the Faithless, like the looter effect there real quick? Because I had always been under the impression that it's bad because it's not card advantage. You are like, you draw 2, you pitch 2, but you're also down the Faithless Looting spell. So it's not actually getting you ahead. Why is this card suddenly so good or so ubiquitous?
Well, it's sort of the way the format's going. It's less like back in the day, the format used to be like the iconic card for me was Flame Tongue Kavu. You're like trying to get as much value as possible, trying to 2-for-1 your opponent. Like people were playing like Skin Render and Prophetic Bolt and like all these big swingy 2-for-1 cards where like all you're trying to do is outvalue your opponent. Now people are topping their curve out at 3, even in control decks. And it's not about value anymore. You could like the cards are so powerful. It just depends on who has the best thing and who's able to answer each other's things better. And so selection and velocity, I think, are more important in the format now by a wide margin than they were previously. And so value has to kind of take a hit to enable decks to find the cards they need to interact or pull ahead of their opponent.
That's fascinating. God, I feel like we could have an entire episode just on that, but we should move on. Like, no more questions, Serge. No more questions. I think Jer had a really good point there. Let's talk about Flesh Taker, aka Olivia. That's the name of this card from now on. Flesh Taker is a 2-mana 2/2 for a white and a black. It's a human assassin and reads, whenever you sacrifice another creature, gain a life and scry. And then it has an activated ability for 1 and sack another creature. Flesh Taker gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Wheeler.
So I've been thinking about this card for a while, and it's definitely has a there's definitely a lot of attention getting paid to it because it's another sack outlet. But time and time again, we get sack outlets that cost 2 and that you have to pay to use their ability. And I'm not exactly a big fan of having to pay to use the ability for, looping purposes, and then also just even something like aristocrats proper. You want to do it a whole bunch of times, right? Like if your cap is mana and you're trying to chain a bunch of Tukatung Thalids and like Doom Travelers, then you're in a pretty bad spot. Thankfully, this card at least has some, applicability, even if it isn't your sack outlet, because the first triggered ability, gaining the life in the scry, isn't attached to its sacrifice in particular. So it's just whenever you sacrifice another creature, you get to do a thing. I'm fairly certain this card will show up as like maybe in a build of aristocrats that is more closer to like a 2-color or a 3-color build than not. Or sorry, more closer to a 2-color or 3-color build than say a 4-color variant. But even then, as far as like 2-mana sack outlets go, where you have to pay a cost up front, I'm still a pretty big fan of Legion Vanguard, the one that we got in Modern Horizons, which is just easier on the casting cost because it's just 1 and a black. It's still a 2/2, and then you have the activated ability of paying 1 colorless to sack another creature and explore. So that value is a bit more permanent. Also lets you churn through a bunch of your garbage cards because, well, again, your deck's filled with them, and it's just easier on basically every account.
I think I'd rather play Eiley over this card as well.
Yeah, Eiley is. I feel like people have forgotten
because she has Death Touch and gains you life. So
Sorry, real quick. Which one is Eiley? How do you even spell Eiley?
Ayli.
All right.
The Eternal Pilgrim?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So Eiley, the Eternal Pilgrim from Oath of the Gatewatch, is a legendary core cleric 2/3 for white and a black with Death Touch. 1, sack another creature, you gain life equal to its toughness, and a second activated ability of a 1, a white, and a black, and sack another creature. Exile target non-land permanent. Activate this ability only if you have at least 10 more life than your starting total. I've seen this more in Soul Sisters and Aristocrats, just because of the second activated ability.
I played it in Sandy B for a long time. Like, this was another sack outlet that earned its keep because just having Death Touch on a body, like its body is always relevant without additional inputs, and it's always has the option to trade up without getting goozled, and then the life gain is pretty good for a deck that is just kind of sitting in front of what your opponent is doing, like your stupid little plant tokens are blocking Thrag Tusks and whatnot. And then when you get to that final ability, you can just take over a game, especially when you get to protect it with like a Caracas. So there's just tough competition, I think.
Wow, yeah. Flesh Taker next to Ayli. Yikes.
We just have so many of these cards, right? Like, we keep getting, God bless them, they keep printing 2-mana sack outlets that do have a whole bunch of text on them, but the text always comes with 1, sack another creature, : like, we need it either to be free, we need it to either be able to sack itself. Something has to be a bit better, and I think it's unlikely that we're going to see too many more cheap free sack outlets.
Yeah, we got Woe Strider, and they're like, that's enough.
Yeah, we got Woe.
That card's the
nut. That card's quite good, and like, that was Theros Beyond Death. They were on something when they made that entire set. So,
all right, let's move on. Next up, we have Florian Voldaren Scion. I think I nailed all those words, and I think I also missed all those words ever so slightly, but it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
You got Florian, right?
I did? Oh, good for me. Voldaren Scion? Voldaren?
Well, you said it differently all 3 times.
I know.
Voldaren Scion?
Yeah,
there you go.
Legendary Vampire Noble 3/3 with first strike, and says, at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponent lost this turn. Exile one of those cards and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and you may play the exiled card this turn. Wheeler, what do you think?
So vampires is the obvious. Yes, you're playing this legend with that creature type with a absurdly good ability attached to it. But then beyond that, I'm actually excited to give this card a tryout in like a Jund mid-range or even like a Mardu mid-range. You know, a 3/3 body is not something that's super impressive on the defensive side. Like this can eat a bolt, it can get Krakist, whatnot. But given that it's relatively cheap to play, you know, you'll find ways to get it back or potentially keep up cards to protect it. And then just on the board tangoing with, you know, creatures, first strike is going to make this kind of miserable to block, especially in a color pairing that like you're like, haha, I'll block your Florian. It's like, well, I'm going to Colgan's command, put 2 damage on this and blow up that, and then the first strike chips it off. You know, situations like that. So I think this card is probably a lot better than it looks. Like, again, if this card gets going, it's pretty hard to stop it, you know? And especially because it's going to give you something immediate the turn that you played, assuming you can connect, because it doesn't have to be itself. Like, I'm dreaming of smacking someone with a Gurmag Angler or a Tombstalker and then getting to look at the top 5 cards of my deck for, you know, like a hand attack spell or even just hit my land drop. And the biggest thing, honestly, is that I'm looking at this and knowing I'm going to lose games where my opponent goes like Ignoble Hierarch on 1, Florian on 2, and then just starts ripping apart my hand.
I was kind of thinking of Black Moon.
Yeah.
Which is a deck that people have been trying, and maybe this is what it needs. Because there's a lot of really cool red-black, like Falconwrath Aristocrat, these like great finishers. You're not quite in Mardu 2 for 1. And black-red just never quite felt good enough by itself. I mean, is black-red the new Boros? Right?
Well, okay, well...
Like, we talked about Boros being bad for a long time and then getting good, and now maybe...
Well, I think that's a little rude to black-red. I mean, I think black-red's issue has always just been identity over strength.
Sure.
Like, your cards are good, you just have to figure out what you're doing with it.
Mono red adding Bump in the Night. And Bob. Yeah.
Like, adding Thoughtseize to your mono red deck isn't going to make it better.
Yeah.
And having more Diregraph Ghouls in your mono red deck isn't going to make it better. And so you kind of needed to figure out a way to, you know, you need a reason to play your deck if we're talking about from a win as many matches as possible dynamic.
All right, I've massively distracted you. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's an important discussion.
Yeah.
Do it now before we have to see it 5 times in the comment section for the next 2 years.
Well, I mean, we can segue that into the next black-red spell, Hungry for More. It's a sorcery. It costs a black and a red. Create a 3/1 black and red vampire creature token with trample, lifelink, and haste. Sack it at the beginning of the next end step and has flashback for 1, a black and a red. So what is Rakdos trying to do in our format
Serge,
here?
from the people that I know that like to play Rakdos and Highlander, you know, the folks through the online communities and whatnot, they're just absolute sickos. They just want to lightning skelemental people into the dirt. They want to go so vroom zoom fast and then rebuy, you know, their lightning skelemental with a Colgan's command.
You do get a lot of haste in black-red. Like, more so than you do in just red or black by itself, eh?
Yeah, you get some pretty punchy cards. You know, as recent as like Modern Horizons 2, they got that 2-mana 3/3 with haste that has Echo discard a card. Rakdos Big Face. I don't actually know what the card is called. Headliner or something. All you need to know is that it just kills you dead. It's like and I think that's what Rakdos is looking to do.
Yeah, you're right. Rakdos Headliner is the 3/3, by the way.
Yeah, they have these like Vroom Zoom Haymaker cards, but then they also just have some recovery tools that let them, you know, get out from under, like I was going to say, a wall of omens, you know, a great wall of omens sort of thing. And so just by looking at this, I've got to imagine the people that have been, you know, playing Hellspark Elemental are ecstatic about Hungry for More. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Next up, Join the Dance. This is a 2-mana sorcery for a green and a white. Says create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens and flashback for 5, 3, a green and a white. Jer.
If you're interested in making tokens and or humans, this card is pretty great. And I would recommend putting it in your deck.
Right on. All right. Next up, we have Catilda, Dawnheart Prime. 2-mana 1/1 legendary human warlock for a green and a white. Protection from werewolves. Human creatures you control have tap to add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. An activated ability 4, green, white, and tap. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that you control. What do you think, Jer?
This is pretty sweet in a human tribal deck. Just being able to accelerate to your late game cards much earlier is pretty exciting. Yeah, I think it's going to see play in that deck if you're playing green. Otherwise, I think it will not see play.
Is it kind of like a budget Raphaelos or something like that? Like, how explosive do you imagine the mana is going to be when this thing comes down?
I mean, it sort of depends on your draw. Like you don't really want to play this on turn 2 unless you really want to go like 2 to 4 or 2 to 5, which is pretty powerful. Don't get me wrong. Like if you have a 5-drop in your hand, that's pretty good. Actually, I lied. You do want to play this on turn 2. Just like going 1-drop into this into 5-drop is kind of nuts. So yeah, good in humans.
Next up, we have Lisa, Forgotten Archangel. This is a 5-mana 4/5 legendary angel for 2 white, white, and a black. It has flying and lifelink, and reads, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. Jer.
All right, so I love 5-drops. I love big idiot angels, but I just don't see this one cutting the mustard. It's all of its abilities are good. It's just even I have to admit that like it's hard to play 5-drops. They really need to have large impact, and this one just doesn't do enough. Like it doesn't end the game. It's a value. You can't play value cards at 5 mana basically unless you're green and they don't actually cost 5.
Is there any way to abuse the second ability to like infinitely sack things into your own hand, or is that just a little too cute for our format?
I mean, if they came back immediately, oh, absolutely. But at the beginning of the next end step, that's not, you're not comboing anybody with that. If we were enduring renewal, if it was enduring renewal, then we'd be having words. But
as it is, it's just a ephemerate, but for like 7 more mana, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Wop, wop, wop. All right. Next up, a card with a lot of words on it. I'll do my best. Ludwig, Necrogenius, is a legendary human wizard 2/3 for a blue and a black, and reads, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, mill a card. Then there's an activated ability, X, blue, blue, black, black, exile X creature cards from your graveyard, and then transform Ludwig. Most notably, X can't be 0 and activate only as a sorcery. So we've paid a whole bunch of costs, a whole bunch of mana, we've exiled some creatures, we flip it over. Then we have Orlog, Ludwig's Hubris. Oh man, we love Hubris here. Orlog is a legendary zombie 4/4 and says, as this creature transforms into Orlog, it becomes a copy of a creature card exiled with it, except its name is now Orlog. It's a 4/4, and it's legendary blue-black zombie in addition to any other colors and types. And then you put a number of +1/+1 counters on Orlog equal to the number of creature cards exiled with it. So to simplify this, pay a whole bunch of mana, exile a bunch of creatures, Orlog becomes a copy of that creature, except it's a 4/4 with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to X, basically. Does that make sense? Is everybody on the same page as to what this card actually does?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. Can you say it again?
Tell me what you think of the card, Wheeler.
Great. I think it's the best woo spy we've ever seen. I'm going to play this in World Gorger Dragon. I'm probably going to play this in other Reanimator too. I think this card's pretty okay. It sets up, it's a payoff at the end of your loop. It's a payoff in the middle of your loop. It helps you just fill up your graveyard on that ETB.
Now help me out here. I play a lot of this format, and I have no idea how this helps any loop. What loop and what role is this playing in the loop?
Okay, well, I'm going to have to unfortunately spoil World Gorger combo, which is going to cost me a lot of free wins. So there's this card called World Gorger Dragon.
All right, let's bring that up real quick. Yeah.
It's a giant dragon. Not going to cover its mana cost,
Sure.
although I have cast it once.
Yeah.
But basically, it has an ETB ability. It says when it comes into play, you exile all other permanents you control. And then it has a leaves play ability. It says when it leaves play, return all the exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner's control.
So you abuse flashing back or repeated ETB things, right?
You use Animate Dead to loop this. So you Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, Necromancy.
Yeah.
They come into play. They bring the World Gorger back. World Gorger says, okay, bye, everybody. Animate Dead or whatever goes away and says, hey, you got to get rid of your World Gorger.
Yeah.
Which happens. And then World Gorger goes, okay, bring it all back. And then
Yeah.
the Animate Dead comes back, yada, yada.
And then you have something else that comes into play and either gains you life or deals damage to them or something, right?
Yeah, you get repeatable ETBs, and so it just lands. You can add, infinite mana, assuming it's not getting interrupted.
Sure.
And if typically you're looking to throw in ETB looters. So there's a whole bunch of them, effectively just 2 mana, idiot babies that when they come into play, you get to draw a card and discard a card. Or when they come into play, the classic is Woo Spy, where it's a 2 mana 1/1 where when it comes into play, you can look at a player's library, the top 2 cards of their library, and put one of them into the graveyard.
So you just mill your opponent out for that?
Well, you can, or you could just mill yourself to get to your kill condition. And so you can mill them, right? But the guaranteed loop is basically you just mill yourself, and then let's go with the cool way to kill people. You get back Tasigur, the Golden Fang, and Tasigur's activated ability lets you mill the top 2 cards of your deck, which you don't have a deck anymore because it's all in your graveyard. And then an opponent gets to return a non-land of their choice to your hand.
And you have infinite mana, so you get your whole deck into your hand?
You just get your whole deck into your hand, which that can involve Lightning Bolt, Collector Brutality to drain them.
Oh, and since you have an infinite mana, I get it. Yeah, and you do it over and over and over, and you don't have a deck, and it's important that all this has to happen at instant speed because you don't have a way to stop the World Gorger Dragon, right?
Well, you can because your Animate Dead or whatnot just targets the Tasigur at the end.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so you pivot basically with the
Neat.
final stroke.
So how does Ludwig fit into this picture?
Well, Ludwig provides another one of those, hey, I'm going to get to mill cards, so I get to, dump your deck into your graveyard. It gets to do that on attack as well, which is kind of nice. So you get to just kind of play that utility-ish role. So, because typically for World Gorger, you're not playing the actual factual looters or even something like Looteril Core because you need that ETB more than, getting to untap or the attacks.
Sure.
But Ludwig allows you to have that flexibility of hey, I didn't kill you the turn I played this. So I get to kind of dig through and sculpt my deck, my hand and whatnot a little, or not hand, but I get to, sculpt my graveyard from my deck or manipulate stuff from my hand on the top of my library to mill, reanimator stuff. And then Ludwig also just lets you, you could just, with all of this mana and all this self-milling, you can set up a kill where you make Ludwig a copy of something in your graveyard, like a Thassa's Oracle. Or you just make Ludwig a copy of, just fairly make it a copy. I say fairly. You make it a copy of the Gristlebrand that's in your graveyard.
Sure.
It just has, you're a graveyard combo deck, and sometimes things don't work out, as you would hope on turn 3 or whatever. And you might have to cast, a Grave Titan, or you might have to play it a little slower.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Right on. All right, let's move on to the next card. Rem Carolus, the Stalwart Slayer. This is a 3-mana 2/3 legendary human knight for 1 of red and white. It has flying and haste, and reads, if a spell would deal damage to you or another permanent that you control, prevent that damage. Just period? All of it?
Uh-huh.
And then, if a spell would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +1. I'm going to throw to me for this one. Wowzer! I like this a lot. I thought I knew what this card did. And then I read it slowly out loud. And this card's even better than I thought it was. This is fantastic. Play this in your Boros aggro decks. Give this a sword. Play this with any burn spell. This probably goes in Jeskai.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does fight with quite a few 3-drop spells, but like...
Yeah.
Do you know what the dream is?
What's the dream?
You play this on turn 3 and you're attacking your mono red opponent. They're trying to kill you, so they don't care about your 2/3 flyer. You're getting low, they're kind of getting low. They like go to price of progress, and you just let it resolve.
And they pick up the card and they're like, that has way more words than I thought it did.
Yeah.
This is... Correct me if I'm mistaken. This is bonkers, but not unfair.
Yeah, it's really, really good, but it's like it dies to bolt.
It's hard to be upset about it, but you will likely die to it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, you could also just be the one casting price of progress, right? Like it doesn't matter who controls the source of damage, it's going to prevent it.
You could also like pyroclasm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It prevents your own damage to you?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Flame Rift, quite good with this card.
Fiery Confluence, that's kind of the sick one.
Psyblast for the draw, not draw.
I love that you're going with Psyblast when the char is in its colors. Yeah.
We're going classic. We're going OG here. I
You have
flex.
to. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, this card's cool as hell. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have Rite of Harmony. This is a 2-mana instant for a green and a white. Whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card. And then it flashbacks for 2 a green and a white. Why does it have flashback?
God.
Well, because after you draw 1,000 cards the first turn, you're going to have lots of mana.
Yeah.
So you might as well do it all again.
What if Glimpse of Nature had a safety net?
But there's also another thing if you really wanted to. If you have a bajillion mana, let's say you're an Enchantress deck and you've got a Sarah Sanctum online, you could do this twice in one turn.
Oh, yeah.
Easily.
Every time you cantrip once, you cantrip twice. Well, the reason we're laughing is there's a lot of cards that already do this that are absolutely busted. And the fact that this now gives you the flexibility to try something like this in Enchantress is great. So Enchantress is a density deck. Enchantress is another one of these decks that plays a bunch of garbage. But once you get enough of the garbage all at the same time, it starts to function a lot better. And the easiest way to disrupt that is to kill your opponent's Enchantresses. They have no way to cantrip. If they have no way to sort of build up or snowball, it all falls apart. But what if they couldn't kill your Enchantress because it's a spell that's in your hand?
Or your graveyard.
Or your graveyard. This is very good, and you should play it in Enchantress.
I'm also contractually obligated to say this is good in Druids, and you should play it in that deck as well.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I believe Serge, you wascally wabbit. Did you put your name down over Jer's?
I gave this to Serge.
Okay. Oh, that's much nicer.
Because it said or enchantment. All I wanted to do was say Druids, but
that's fair. I mean, importantly too, it triggers off tokens.
Yeah.
Which just feels so wild.
Oh, any creature. Oh my God.
Any creature.
Very good with Ant Queen.
Oh, isn't there a new Archon? What's the 3/4 flying unicorn thing with lifelink that every time you cast an enchantment, you get a 2/2 angel? Pegasus, whatever?
Yeah.
Dude, that with Rite of Harmony?
Ooh.
Right?
That's not bad.
That's not bad. This is the one example of this card hitting both enchantment and creature at the same time.
Yeah, you could play it with Nadir Kraken or Chasm Skulker. Chasm Skulker needs a little bit more work. I like how we're taking the first. You said there's a bunch of busted versions of this, but I mean, you got Glimpse of Nature.
Yeah.
And then the second best version of that card is just so infinitely worse than Glimpse.
So there's other effects like Beast Whisperer, like Jared's Druid deck plays a bunch of
Gilt Leaf Archdruid, the best one.
Yeah,
Ooh.
it's stapled to like 6 mana creatures or whatever, right?
5 mana, thank you very much.
So you'll take it anytime you can. Like this effect is so powerful, even if
Right.
it's on an objectively overpriced creature. You're like, get it in there.
Right. Yeah. Like I'm just saying is that this is very like for our format, this is much closer to Glimpse than any other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think in a lot of decks that counting tokens matters a lot too. Because
Oh
being
yeah.
able to
Yeah.
even in like a planeswalker deck, like I could see playing this because you just like have 3 planeswalkers in play. You're just like, yeah, sure, I'll recall this turn. Why not?
Yeah. When I saw this, I started thinking about actual just boring elf tribal, and I started sweating as soon as I thought about Wirewood Hive Master.
Yeah.
Just insect tokens. Throw in a Genesis chamber. Who cares? All rules are off.
All right, let's move on here. Next up, we have Rite of Oblivion, a white-black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a non-land permanent, exile target non-land permanent, and you can flash it back for 2, a white and a black. Jer.
This is quite good. You get to get rid of your worst permanent and this card to exile their best permanent, non-land permanent, I guess. And that's a pretty good trade most of the time, especially if you have ways to make it a non-symmetrical trade, such as you're sacrificing a quarter of a Lingering Souls or something that has a dies trigger, or a Kitchen Finks, or I guess that has a dies trigger. Or you're an Aristocrats deck and want to play a removal spell, and you just actively want to get rid of your permanents. So yeah, this card is quite good. It'll see play in Aristocrats and outside of Aristocrats, I theorize.
Heck yeah. Next up, Sacred Fire. This is a 2-mana instant for a red and a white. Deal 2 damage to any target and gain 2 life. And then it has flashback for 6 for a red and a white. Wheeler.
I just don't think it does enough damage, that is. I mean, I'll take most lightning helixes, you know? Like, I think Angel Fire Ignition is the secret lightning helix because it's always going to the dome, right? I mean, where else are you going to point a burn spell? Am I right? This comment brought to you by Play with Fire. But yeah, two mana for the 2 damage. It's just not enough, and like the flashback at 6 is probably a bit too much as well. It's not like reliably killing anything.
I think that's the biggest part is how important 3 toughness and 4 toughness is. That's why we play Flame Slash.
Yeah, like
right?
Magma Jet just doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There are too many threats just have more than 2 points of toughness.
Might as well go to the face. Just
Yeah.
Angel Fire yourself.
Angel Fire
oblivion.
yourself.
Yeah.
Just throw the card in the garbage, pay 2 mana, and slowly exhale.
Yeah, I'm just gonna buy 100 copies of this card, and every time I cast it, every time I flash it back, I rip it up. I'll let it hit the graveyard first.
Awesome. All right. Next up, we have Sigarda, Champion of Light. This is a 4-mana 4/4 legendary angel for 1, a green, and a white. It has Flample, flying, and trample. Humans you control get +1/+1, and it has a Coven ability. Whenever Sigarda attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a human creature card from among them and put it into your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Jer.
I actually think this card's pretty good. 4/4 flying trample and a human lord is just good enough in decks that already exist, even if you're not like humans is like kind of like an afterthought, not even a main idea. But if you're playing humans as like a main idea in a green white deck, this card's got to be pretty great. So yeah, I think it'll see play in some more like niche decks. 4/4 flying trample for 4 relevant lord and potentially gets you card advantage. Yeah.
Heck yeah. Next up, we have Siphon Insight. This is a 2-mana instant for a blue and a black, and reads, look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library. Exile one of them face down and put the other on the bottom of that library. You may look at and play the exiled card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell, and then it has flashback for 1, a blue, and a black. Jer.
This is my favorite card in the set for sure.
It's really interesting.
I love it.
I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on this card.
I love this card. I have like a a strong bias towards like the Steelio stuff, and I just love playing the mind games. Like, did I get a good card? Is it a land? Like, this card can play lands, so even just hitting your land drops is good.
Is there a special play pattern with this? Are you trying to use this to counter, vampiric tutors, or are you just firing this off as soon as you want? Like, why is this good?
I think you're mostly just casting it as like a cantrip kind of thing. I don't think it's better than most of the 2-mana draw spells that exist or cantrips that exist already. I just think it's higher variance, which probably makes it on average worse, but it's more fun. So
That's important, actually. Yeah.
take your choice. But like the ceiling is super high because like sometimes you'll take the Stormdex Tendrils of Agony and just leave it exiled forever and then you win, or the Scape Shift, or you'll get to do as you mentioned, encounter a Vampiric Tutor, or even if you cast it, it's really hard for your opponent to cast top of deck tutors
In response, yeah.
which can be troublesome for them. But even just like cards like Gaunty and stuff like that are just really fun to play with. Like maybe you get access to like a burn spell and you get to kill a planeswalker, or like you have 2 cards exiled with this and they're thinking about going to a low life, but you might have burn spells exiled. So it just makes the games more interesting, I think. And so I think this card will be really fun to play with. And I think it's pretty reasonable. Like you do get 2 cards, you do get card advantage out of it over the course of the game. It's an instant. Both halves are pretty reasonable cost wise. So I could see playing this over Impulse in a blue-black deck.
Huh. Fascinating. All right, next up, we have probably one of my favorite cards in the set. We got Slogurk the Overslime. This is a legendary 3-mana 3/3 for 1, a green and a blue. Has Trample, and then has whenever a land is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Slogurk the Overslime. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Slogurk to return Slogurk to your hand. And when Slogurk leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. This card, it's perfect. And the reason I love it so much is it fits wonderfully in this shell of a card that will simultaneously facilitate you if you're a combo lands player, and if you're somebody who just wants to like have a lands sub package and like turn a big idiot sideways and crush. This is basically a planeswalker. It has so many abilities. I don't know. Am I singing the praises too high for this? I think this card's really cool.
No, I mean, I think it's good. It's a good Magic card.
It gets pretty big potentially.
Yeah. Like From Anywhere is kind of huge. It like 1 Dredge of Life from the Loam, and it's massive already.
Yep.
One, you crack, how many fetch lands do you crack in a game?
Exactly.
Wastelands. And then just putting other, getting other counters on it through some variation of 2020 Magic cards or whatever is not that difficult. And so, I think you could likely see it get to a size where it's going to do something relevant, or sorry, it'll get to the size where it has to be addressed, and then also just gives it the opportunity to go back to your hand to then do something relevant to your strategy. You can also just Caracas it.
Yeah, I feel lands cards typically are either they have a really cool effect, but the body sucks, or they're purely like a beatdown strategy, like the red-green style. It's very rare to find a card that offers this much flexibility. Like there are some lands cards I'll only play in combo lands. There's some lands cards I'll only play in like the mid-range with a lands package on the side. And I think this one gets in all of them. I don't know. I have a big smile on my face. I just like Slogurk. I also just like saying the name Slogurk.
It's really, really good with Zern Orb.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is it's another infinite with like fastball combo, right? If you're suddenly doing a bunch of stuff, you can pump this up infinitely and then crack for trample as a win condition, right?
Yeah.
Or if the board is getting super stalled out and you're not too far ahead, you can bounce it to your hand, return Thespian Stage Dark Depths. You could bring it back and just wasteland and strip mine them again, right? Like this gives you a land lock without needing Crucible. It's a little clunkier, but like theoretically you can, take out their lands, bounce it back to your hand, replay all the lands, put the counters back on it again, right?
Yeah.
It's almost its own engine piece. It slices, it dices. Let's move on.
Oh,
All right, next up we have Teferi, who slows the sunset. It's a 4-mana planeswalker with 4 loyalty. Cast it for 2, a white, and a blue. +1 ability. Choose up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, up to 1 target land. Untap the chosen permanents you control. Tap the chosen permanents you don't control. And you also gain 2 life. -2 ability. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And -7, you get an emblem with untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step, and you draw a card during each opponent's draw step. Jer.
So I don't actually think this card is very good outside of exactly Time Vault. I think it's kind of funny that the ultimate is literally useless in Time Vault. Yeah, I like this doesn't protect itself very well. It doesn't have a lot of impact. It minuses to anticipate, which is like fine but not great. Yeah, I just don't think it's very good unless you're planning to untap Time Vault perpetually.
All right. Sorry, Teferi. You were too powerful and now you're too slow.
Yeah, kind of a nice change.
oh, see, this card was just a plant. They wanted to put in a lackluster Teferi so that people just calm down and try to forget War of the Spark and whatnot.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. Next up, we have Tovalar, Dire Overlord. This is a 3-mana legendary human werewolf 3/3 for 1, a red, and a green. Whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. You don't squeak as part of that combat ability. That's just me making perfectly ordinary human noises. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes night. Then transform any number of human werewolves you control. And then we flip over to the night side, and it's a 4/4 and says whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And then X, red, green, target wolf or werewolf you control gains +X/+O and gains trample until end of turn. Wolf run? No. A callback. Wheeler, what do you think?
All right, my count, there are only, including Tovalar, there are only 24 playable wolves and werewolves in Highlander.
Does that include wolf tokens off of Garrux?
No, but I was getting to that.
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's okay. So what I'm trying to say is I don't think werewolf tribal is a thing. That said, this card drawing just off itself and off of other cards that would accompany, a 3-drop grindy mid-range-ish card or something that has an amount of payoff later in the game, they're going to make some wolves. You'll have a Garrick here. You could play this in a deck with Huntmaster, with any of the 3-drop actual factual werewolves that already see some amount of play in the like Mox Soul Ring red-green decks or Mox Crypt. And then that flip side is kind of disgusting. Like, at least what it targets is limited. You kind of know where that pump is going.
Yeah, to Chameleon Colossus.
Yeah, nice. Oh, I see you picked up a copy of Eternal Grasp, huh? Well, unfortunately, do I have a Vince McMahon for you? Yeah, so this card has the case of its ability, like drawing a card when it hits, great, cool. At the flip side, also, just drawing you more cards and then being able to pump itself or maybe the occasional friend that comes with it, very cool. But there are just probably better cards for you to play, like I think that this card suffers from, it's a 3-drop in a red-green deck.
Yeah.
That just kind of asks for a bit too much, whereas like I would just rather play the Reckless Stormseeker, the red one.
Yeah, it gives everything else haste. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I think it suffers from it's not really like firmly value or firmly aggressive. It's sort of trying to do both, and it doesn't. Decks want one or the other, and they want to like min max. They don't want the average Joe.
Next up, we have the Vampire Socialite. This is a 2-mana 2/2 Vampire Noble for a black and a red. Has Menace. And when it enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each other vampire that you control. As long as an opponent's lost life this turn, each other vampire you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Wheeler.
So, in hindsight, putting a card in the set review that mostly just stands there as the reminder that Vampire Tribal has unfortunately won tournaments at Yellow Jacket Comics and Toys.
Why
And
are you sad about that? Hold
unfortunately,
on, time out. What do you mean, unfortunately?
it's a long story. We don't have to get into it.
That's
but
fair.
it happened.
Okay. Yeah, Wheeler hates vampires. Got it.
No. Let's not spread that rumor.
Uh-huh.
All right, there are plenty of decks in this format I hate. Vampires is not one of them. Time Vault. Honestly, I mean, quarantine has changed me. I've become infinitely more empathetic towards Time Vault. It's Thassa's Oracle I hate. The point is, well, now I don't know what I was talking about.
Vampires.
No, I do.
You're
Yeah,
talking about
vampires.
You hating vampires.
No. Okay. I think Vampires is a totally legit and, dare I say it, good tribal deck. And as much as it pains me to say, it might actually just be better than Zombies as a tribal deck by the merit of...
Really?
Well, unfortunately, now this one I can say, because I love Zombies to bits. Get it? Because their bodies are falling apart. Vampires has good 2-drops in this format, or 2-drops in this creature type, carried decks in their respective formats. Like Calastria Highborn, if that card is not dealt with, you are losing the game. And so this is another very strong 2. It's good by itself. So if this is your first threat, off a mock straw, or if you hand attacked on 1 or something, it's fine, right? It's going to have an ability that'll help out other vampires, and Menace is going to be nice for, of course, being able to attack freely. And then it's in the color combination where Menace is the most scary. And then if you do draw it late, it can be pretty gross in buffing your whole team. I guess I was saying it had to end at V. Why did it end at V? I mean, it's a vampire, but...
Last question.
Yeah.
Red-black vampires or Mardu vampires?
I think now you just go red-black. I know that the people... Yeah, the people that were jamming... Well, I mean, Soren's a vampire only in the lore.
Well, he's a vampire... Like, doesn't the down abilities make vampire tokens on some of the Sorens?
Yes, but... I just don't think you need it. Like previously you had white. I know the vampire diehards had played white in their deck, and you get the added utility of having Armageddons and swords and that kind of stuff. But like they've just pumped out so many good red black vamps over the years where they kind of just make the white cards look unnecessary.
All right, fair enough. Let's talk about the last gold card we're going to talk about today, and it's a commander card. Let's talk about Wilhelt, the Rot Cleaver. Wilhelt or Wilhelt?
Wilhelt.
Wilhelt, the Rot Cleaver. 4-mana 3/3 legendary zombie warrior for 2, a blue and a black. Whenever another zombie you control dies, if it didn't have Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, and at the beginning of your end step, you may sack a zombie. If you do, draw a card.
So thank you. Unfortunately, there aren't any Canlander playable, and I'm being very strict with this term, Canlander playable loops that you can use with this card, because that's a pretty, it doesn't have the qualifier of non-token. So theoretically, you can just turn normal zombie tokens, which zombie cards tend to make, into more zombie tokens. Like you get to have your decaying corpse of a zombie die and then actually start decaying, which is kind of scary, especially when you start involving sack outlets and blood artist style effects. And then at the end, you have just this kind of value engine. You just get to cash in some dirt tier zombie that you have and draw an extra card and make a token and all that jazz. So all the text on that card, like in the text box, is pretty good and right in line with what Zombies is looking to do. However, it is a 4-drop.
Yeah.
That part is Zombies doesn't need any more 4s.
I have a quick question about this, specifically the create a zombie loop that you're talking about. In the comments of episode 1, a lot of people were pointing out that like, you didn't talk about the back of Poppet Stitcher, how it gets rid of abilities. We were like, we read that part.
I thought we did read that part.
We absolutely did, but
yeah.
whatever. That too cute as a 2-card combo with a sack outlet to be like, the zombie tokens you create don't have decayed. Sort of like a Malira. Like, is there somehow a zombie loop that you could create using Poppet Stitcher's Poppet Factory, whatever that site is called?
It is too cute.
Way too cute.
It's a little too
cute. You don't really want to put Poppet Stitcher in a zombie tribal deck.
Yeah, that's a deck that's probably hitting, 40 creatures minimum. And so I don't think they're finding a home in the same deck. And I don't know if I'm a blue-black deck with a 2-card combo.
Sorry, but you know what we could call it? We could call it Malira Pop.
You
don't even play Malira, but the way deck names, come on, that's a good name. That's a good name.
So you're saying you don't want to put Phyrexian Altar in your zombies deck, Ben?
Maybe if my life total starts at 40 and I have to begin the game by introducing my commander as Vilhelp. But
I cut you off. You said something about 4-drops. It's a 4-drop.
Yeah, well, it's a 4-drop legend that doesn't have an ETB that dies to bolt. And so as much as I love zombies and I love the, what this card could potentially do, and I'll die to this card if somebody shows up with zombies. Like if this card is in someone's zombie deck and they get it and you can't answer it, you're probably dying, but there's so many ways to answer it. It's so fragile and doesn't do enough immediately. So sorry, buddy.
Cover artifacts real quick here. First up, Jack-o'-lantern, 1 mana artifact. 1 tap and sack it. Exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and draw a card. Very nice. And then 1 and exile Jack-o'-lantern from your graveyard to add 1 mana of any color. Wheeler, is it an egg?
I mean, technically it's an egg, but it's not an egg I'm going to play.
Now, why is that?
Well, it has to exile itself to actually be up mana, to filter mana, which is kind of bad. I, tend to use my eggs from my graveyard. And then using the activated ability to hit a single card and then just to draw a card. I have that already. I got Scrabbling Claws. And Scrabbling Claws, you could just keep on tapping it over and over again to slow burn their graveyard. I got Phyrexian Furnace, which is just Scrabbling Claws, exiling, 1 card at a time, but it's a graveyard order matters card. And so I get the added tilt factor. Also the added, you get to muck whatever. You can hit Time Walks with that card, or recalls is what I'm saying. And and then Nihil Spellbomb. So there's so many artifact hating egg or graveyard hating eggs, that already exist that are better, and you don't need a 4th.
All right. And let's talk about the Moon Silver Key, 2 mana artifact, 1 and tap and sack key. Search your library for an artifact card with a mana ability or a basic land card. Reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. What do you think, Wheeler?
Yeah, this one's messed up. This is... Oh, God.
Oh, yeah. Mana ability, eh?
I hadn't actually played with Urza's Saga in eggs until the day... that I won the local Highlander tournament with eggs because of how busted Urza Saga was. And Urza Saga is just usually finding Lotus, right? Because Black Lotus is an artifact with a mana ability. What if I told you that there were other artifacts with mana abilities that eggs
in our
wants
format?
To play?
No.
Yeah, and not just eggs. I mean, Paradox can play it too, but eggs... I mean, the fact that this card lets me find the 3 most important cards of my deck, Black Lotus, Krark Clan Ironworks, and Basic Island, is huge. It just lets me play out even easier than normal under Blood Moon. It lets me find the most absurd cards in my deck and some of the most absurd cards that are in the game. And then there's just a bunch of added kind of utility attached to it where technically this can find you something like any egg. That's a pretty big thing. It can find just a normal egg like Golden Egg or Sky Cloud Egg, that kind of thing, eggs, because they have mana abilities and they also draw cards. So this card just does everything you could ever want. And I kind of wish it was 1 mana, but I'll take 2.
Oh no.
Well, it's just unfortunate. I can't find it off Treasure Mage or sorry, Trinket Mage.
Yeah, you poor thing. You poor thing.
I'll survive though.
Somehow,
you poor thing. The last cards we're going to talk about today are actually the new cycle of dual lands. We still call them dual lands, even if not fetchable. And we're going to talk about Deserted Beach as an example. So for this cycle, the lands enter tapped unless you control 2 or more lands, and then they tap to add one of 2 colors. So Deserted Beach, for example, taps for a white or a blue. And I don't know. What do you what do you think?
Not to be nitpicky, but it's 2 or more other lands, so it needs to be your third land.
This is your third. So this is the opposite of the Scars lands, which was the third or less.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So are these slow lands? First of all, what are we calling them?
I think slow lands makes the most sense.
Do you like this better or worse than the buddy lands, the ones that would enter tapped unless you control the plains or an island?
Oh, like Glacial Fortress and stuff?
Yeah. So that's probably the closest comparison right now.
God, I really want to go full Magic player but actually you.
Please.
Actually, Serge, I think the closest comparison would be the Battle for Zendikar lands that are dependent on you having 2 or more basic lands.
I would disagree. I think those are harder to hit in our format. So they're a whole tier lower.
Depends on the deck, I think.
But the tap lands itself are like cream of the crop. Like I don't like Glacial Fortress and Friends.
Yeah.
Those it's amazing how much like those cards. How often do they come into play tapped?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's very good. So we have obviously OG duels are the best, then Rav duels, and then the buddy lands is probably next.
Yeah.
Or filter lands.
And then you have like filter lands pretty close. You have the fast lands from the Scar block.
What about your pain lands? I mean, I'm not looking to tier list this. I'm just saying that I think that I wouldn't hate playing these, but it really depends on which ones. Like, I don't think I'm going to be playing the red green or the green white one anytime. But yeah, I might play the black blue one depending on how slow my deck is.
You slam the blue white one in control for sure. But
yeah, exactly. Like the blue X ones are great.
I think these would be limited to 2-color decks and slower 2-color decks.
Yeah.
Right. I guess there's a very real risk in this being in your opening 7 of this land being tapped.
Oh God, I wish I had written down how I evaluated these initially. It's like if you have this in your opening hand and it feels like often you have enough autonomy with how you're going to progress through your first couple of turns that this will be able to come and play either untapped when you need it, or you can play it tapped because you don't need it, where it's like, unless you're keeping a really bad hand or a hand where you kind of have your fingers crossed, I think that this card is likely coming into play tapped and you're cool with that.
Yeah, like turn 1, you're like, whatever, I have 2 lands in hand, I'll have this enter play tapped, and that way I guaranteed have double untapped turn 2.
Yeah, it comes into play tapped on turn 1 so that you can have so you can have Hymn to Torak or Counterspell on 2. It comes into play tapped on turn 2, which means that you likely got to fire off a cantrip, a hand attack spell, or a burn spell on 1. And if you didn't need to use it on 1, then you might use it on 2. And then on turn 3, it's coming into play untapped, which is good. So I think I'm with Jer where I'd prefer this in slower decks and primarily 2-color decks. But I think that the average play pattern that you are going to have with this card is going to lead you to be happy with it, or mulligan better. Like I think that's yeah.
Well, that's it for our set review in terms of the individual cards we want to talk about today. I do want to open the floor to the both of you to ask just general impressions on this set. We've been doing this for the past couple sets, and I've really enjoyed just sort of hearing big picture thoughts. Let's start with Wheeler.
It's nice that there isn't anything too broken. I think you can just call it not broken. Like, it feels like a lot of quality of life upgrades, which is nice. You have cards going to more niche tribal decks, and they're actually the kind of cards that they want. You have, not that Shock needed an upgrade,
sure,
but you have an upgrade to your Gaia Reach Bandit or whatever medium red garbage you're casting off an Ancient Tomb. And yeah, it's the cards that are really good. They feel, the Poppet Stitchers and whatnot, they feel powerful but not oppressive. And if that is a design trend for the format and for card design, then I'm glad of it.
Heck yeah. Share.
Yeah, I like these sets a lot. There's a lot of like really cool designs. They hit a lot of cool flavor notes with like some throwbacks to the original set. I agree with Ben. I much prefer when they explore like unique design space as opposed to just like power tuning design space. And I think they got that pretty good this time. They like tuned it pretty well. There's some cards I'm excited to try, and there's also no cards I'm like groaning about. So
Right on. Thank you so much for listening to part 3 of our set review. As always, if you think we missed any cards, you just want to talk about it, let us know down in the comments below. We always appreciate it. A reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you through support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Serge, joined by Jer and Wheeler, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.